Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Next in Time podcast. I'm your host, ST Tangarella, and today our guest is none other than Adam Daywalker. If you want to know more about who he is the guy willing to bring back the retro arcade games into the virtual world, so as they say. So he's out there trying to make retro arcade games accessible to everyone in an affordable, easy to use plug and play setup, offering officially licensed games. And his company Recade is creating a system that helps connect players together to build and amplify this amazing community. So, Adam, welcome to the show.
Hey, ST, thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
I'm glad you're able to join and just talk about the retro life.
Yeah,
Because
absolutely.
yeah, because what I'll say is when I was young, I used to always go to the arcades, and I was not a big video game. I was never a big video game guy, but I was always a huge arcade game guy, even for someone who was born in the '90s. So,
Okay. I mean, you missed so much. That's like sort of the golden age of arcade gaming right there.
yeah. And so I'm just trying to figure out like what was it like back in the 80s, let's say, because people always talk about the arcade as this archetype of the 80s. So what was it like?
Yeah, the arcades were really interesting. I was born in 1980, so, I still remember the 80s arcades. I spent a lot of time in malls growing up, and was happily in the late 80s, early 90s, got the opportunity to be a full-fledged mall rat for a couple of years and actually lived uh, within a stone's throw of the parking lot to a mall. So that was it gave me freedom and access to be able to wander the halls and then, of course, loiter at the local Aladdin's Castle in that mall for hours at a time. So, very, very familiar with the environment. But the really interesting thing about it is that it was sort of this like this convergence of many different types of social environments all packed together in one.
Yeah,
It was, I remember in the 80s, it was like, I was like towards the end of the 80s, it was like, 9, 10-ish. And yeah, I'd be in the arcades and be hanging out with like, the punks, and you'd have like the prep kids, and then you'd have like the younger kids, and
you
you
get
just
the
have all these.
you get the geeks, you get the jocks, you get the nerds, you get every kind of personality
Yeah,
into that in that arcade.
yeah, exactly. It was this like amazing soup of like all these different folks and from all these different backgrounds that were a part of all these different subcultures. And the one subculture that combined all of them, or that connected all of them together, was that gaming culture that was there. And there was a ton of games where you're sitting there playing in a single player mode, and then someone comes up and slaps a quarter on the machine and says they've got next, and you start have a conversation with them, and then before you know it, you start making friends, and it's someone who comes from a totally different walk of life that you maybe never would have interacted with had it not been for them wanting to get that next turn at whatever game it was that you were playing at the time. So yeah,
Yeah,
just really, really incredible place.
yeah. So in terms of what would be your favorite arcade game?
My favorite arcade game, I would say hands down, it has to be Narc. Not sure if you've ever heard of it. It came out in the late 80s, and you played as one of two law enforcement officers. It
Yeah.
was, I mean, like, the tagline that we use for it in Recade is it's the war on drugs through the eyes of a teenager that has seen too many 80s action movies and drank too much cola. So it's over the top action, over the top goriness, and it
That's
was
what's
something.
That's what
Was that?
signifies that's what signifies the 80s is
Oh yeah,
the
oh
over
yeah,
the top
exactly.
action. Like all
Yeah,
like a lot of movies out there, they have over the top characters. Like if you see a lot of Schwarzenegger, Stallone movies from the 80s, like
oh yeah,
they always played a very over the top character, and the way they do their actions is like, oh, I gotta do it in a very stylized form.
yeah. There was a lot of that going on, of course, and games were just as cheesy and oftentimes just as over the top with their action as well. And yeah, it was my favorite game, and I played it every chance I got. I think I finally beat it once in the arcade, but man, that thing, probably hundreds of dollars in quarters I've pumped into that machine over the years.
All right. Yeah, I think we got an interesting aspect of your life as a gamer. But how about I just wondering, what is your background like before?
Yeah, absolutely. So I never had this sort of straight path. I didn't grow up thinking I wanted to become an entrepreneur and I wanted to build a startup. That was sort of never in the cards for me. I let's see, I went to undergrad in San Francisco. I went to the San Francisco Art Institute and I got my BFA there. And I was just living in the city and doing working full time at a place out there and doing well and all that great stuff. And I was just like, man, I got to figure out the next thing that I'm going to do in my life. I'm just not really sure what's going to happen. And yeah, I ended up meeting my future wife out there, and we moved around a little bit, and we ended up in Pittsburgh. And uh, she went to grad school while we were there, and I was working at a university while I was there, and you get free tuition. That's one of the great benefits of working for a university. And I said, well, screw it. I'm gonna finally try to, I guess I've been kind of toying with this idea ever since undergrad of like, wouldn't it be really cool to bring the arcades back, and wouldn't it be really cool to do something where we could relive that space that you can't really find anymore in that same kind of way. There's like the local arcade sort of has almost all but died. I mean, you'll find them at your local bowling alleys here and there, but the way that they
Yeah,
used to be.
one example would be Dave and Buster's here in the West Coast.
Yeah, yeah, and there's Dave and Buster's is everywhere, and that's I they've got their thing that they're doing, and that's great. But every time I go into a Dave and Buster's, I'm always disappointed, and I'm always just like, the buttons are all sticky, or the machines are broken, or the light guns need to be recalibrated, and the environment and the space of it is just no longer a community that I'm a part of, and it doesn't resonate with me at all. And so while I was in Pittsburgh, like I said, I was working at a university and I got free tuition. So I said, all right, well, I'm going to go and get my MBA and see how that goes. And so I did. I went through the MBA program, finished that. And then halfway through that program, I was like, you know what, this is for me. I'm going to do this. I'm going to build this company. And I foolishly thought an MBA would give me the background to successfully go into entrepreneurship. I was wrong. It does not prepare you for any of that stuff.
Yeah,
It's
MBAs are meant for working in the corporate office and just being like a corporate person. Well, but entrepreneurship is basically life experience is the pathway on how to become an entrepreneur.
Yeah, yeah, and I don't think it's there's a lot of great things that you're going to learn in an MBA program, and you're going to understand a lot of the basics, and you're going to be able to speak business in a way that you wouldn't had you not. So it's definitely a step up, and it definitely does give you some groundwork. But it is in no way like you're saying. It's definitely much more for the corporate environment is where that mentality thrives a bit more, and it isn't so much based around taking bigger risks and these kinds of things. But that was just my experience. I thoroughly
Interesting.
enjoyed it, and yeah, it was a great experience. But yeah, like I said, it was not even halfway through the program where I was just like, yeah, the bug bit me, and I was like, I'm gonna do this.
Well, what
Uh,
year was this?
this was let's see, this was 20 2015. I think it was,
2015.
yeah, I think it was 2015. And the idea for Recade back then was very different from what we are today. I hadn't, it was still just a kernel of an idea. But the idea back then was I was trying to figure out a way to merge creator maker spaces with an arcade. So it would be a place that you could come to, a physical location that not only had a space to play games, but also to uh, build your own games. If you wanted to build an arcade cabinet in the wood shop that we would have, if you wanted to program and understand how to build your own games, you could do that in the computer lab. So kind of a hybrid educational workshop space with a player space as well. So
Yeah.
kind of tapping into that maker culture with the gamer culture.
Got it. And so now with your startup,
Yeah,
Recade, yeah,
yeah.
as I mentioned before, you are looking to bring back these vintage games in the present day gamer format, right? In terms of the online gaming kind of thing.
Yeah, so our whole mission behind Recade is to bring the arcade home. That's what we stand for, and that's the thing that we're trying to do every step of the way with everything that we're working on. And the way that we're doing that is by building a unique console and controller that are a platform for all things retro. We're focused on the arcade space right now, and not just the 80s, but we're focused on arcade games from the 70s through the early aughts.
Like
And what we're
all the way from Pac-Man till
Oh
now.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Pong, Pac-Man, yeah, all that great stuff. And we're moving that.
Even the I don't know, I think is it was it true back back in the 70s that
Mhm.
when the Atari came out that they were placed in arcade rooms. Is that true, or is it just a video game thing? Is that a different thing?
That the the Atari consoles were in arcades.
Yeah, if I recall. I think there was like some
Uh,
games, but I don't know. I think I
the
was just
yeah, the 70s are before my time, so I can't speak to any firsthand knowledge of that.
hmm,
But in all of the research that I've done, and in all of the time I've spent living in arcades, I've never come across a console in an arcade until I want to say it was, and I don't even think it was in an actual arcade like in Aladdin's Castle or a Nickelodeon or more of those neighborhoody kind of arcades that were either in a strip mall or a proper mall. Um, yeah, I think the only time I've ever really seen a console in an arcade was at a there was a couple of places that I'd seen. I think they kind of popped up more frequently in the like the PC cafes where they had like all the computers linked together and you could go and do like LAN parties and stuff like that. And I think a natural progression of that was to say, hey, let's bring an Xbox in here, let's bring some PlayStation in here, that kind of stuff. And I remember going into some cafes, some internet cafes like that, and seeing uh, like 10 Xboxes networked together or something like
got it.
that. But yeah, I don't think I've ever actually seen an arcade that had a console in it. Although interestingly, I was on vacation a couple of years back in Toronto, and my buddies and I, we all were been drinking all night. We were walking through some neighborhood. We had no idea where we were, just having a great time. And we turned a corner, and I saw this big sign, and it said arcade. And it was like 2 o'clock in the morning, and I was like, "We're going." And we walked in, and it was this really, really cool arcade bar. And they had wall to wall, just lined arcades, all smashed together. We were all like, we're all like in our 30s and 40s, and we're all smashed around trying to play the TMNT arcade game together. It's like definitely, I remember a lot more room when I was 10, 11 than now. So it's kind of funny. But they had a separate space where they had different booths set up, and they had like the NES, the SNES, N64, those kinds of things. You could sit there in front of a big like 40-inch screen and play. So that was really cool.
Yeah.
But yeah, I definitely think it's something that you see a lot more of now. But back in the 80s, 90s, that definitely wasn't. It definitely wasn't an experience I'd ever come across.
Got it. So what is it? Okay, so for example, what's your vision, what you're trying to build with Recade, like, which is bringing back the 80s games to the present day? So why do you think like a lot of people really would like to bring back that? Because nowadays we have a large gaming culture. We want to play
Mm-hmm.
games on our consoles, but and then if they really want to go play arcades, go like play straightforward games in the arcade, there's always those chains like Dave and Buster's and all that stuff to go. But why is it that people are in need for these what do you call it? Retro games.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, I just do want to reiterate, it's not just 80s games that we're focused on. We are focused on games from the 70s to the early aughts. So we're covering games from the 70s, 80s, 90s, and then the early 2000s. And the reason why I think people tend to not have as much of an enjoyment experience in these spaces like Dave and Buster's that you just brought up is for some of the aforementioned reasons that I was saying. There's a lot of um, there's a lot of problems with the machines. Either they're abused or they're not being taken care of properly, or they're just they're just outright out of service. So you're never quite sure the kind of experience you're going to get when you go to these places. You go and there could be really, drunk people being really boisterous. There could be a time that you have to wait, if you go with a party. And the Dave Busters that I last went to had, I think, like 4 or 5 Daytona USA machines together. It was like, cool, we can all go and play against each other on this. That's awesome. But you go and there's like 3 kids sitting in them and using them, and so you have to wait. And it's just, it's an inconvenience, and it's a thing where that whole idea around the identity and the third place of what the arcades represented back in the day when it was offline only and you could only go to the space to actually experience that has been completely lost, in my opinion.
Yeah. And so with these
Mhm.
controllers, sorry, not right. I don't want to say, I don't mean to say retro, but these controls
Yeah.
that you create to be able to play these games, like what does the structure look like, the setup and everything?
Yeah, so we're designing a controller that is a bit of a leap away from arcade controls. We have to design something that is at least for version 1, is a more one size fits all type of solution, because what we're offering is a library of arcade games that you can play directly from your couch on your TV. And you do so through the Recade system and have access to an entire library of arcade games. And so what we have to build is we have to build something that's flexible enough that allows people to play a ton of different genres of games, right? You have some games that were designed that used only a trackball. You have some games that were designed as a dual stick kind of game, so no buttons at all. So games like Smash TV, I believe Berserk was like that. I'm not 100% certain if there weren't any buttons on that machine. Virtual On definitely was one of those, although that also had buttons as well as dual sticks. And so, there's a lot of different variations in how games were built and how they were played. And you have to design something that is going to hit as much of those sweet spots as you possibly can. And what we've decided on and what we've tested through some customer interviews is on developing our own controller that is more reminiscent of more modern controller setups. So think like Xbox Series X or
Or a
PlayStation.
place, or
Yeah, or
even
like a
Nintendo.
PlayStation 5. Yeah, not so much a Nintendo, definitely much more along the lines of like the Xbox style or the PlayStation style. And so you can envision that there's going to be, a couple of thumbsticks and about 6 buttons on the face or so to really give that flexibility at being able to play anything from, say, Street Fighter to Mortal Kombat to any 2-button games to all of the SNK games, which have a variety of buttons on those. Which I believe it was 4 or 5. I'm not recalling off the top of my head, unfortunately. But yeah, so there's a flexible system that we're building that allows you to play these games comfortably. And one of the great features that we're also building into it is the button remapping. So if you do decide you don't want to play it the way it's defaulted, you can always change that around. Um, the future, of course, has us designing additional controllers that can go along with it, whether that's light guns or something that is much more reminiscent of an actual arcade setup itself. So something with an actual joystick and clicky buttons, that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of planning that's going on into what those next iterations are going to look like. But we got to walk before we can run. So we're starting with our first edition.
Yeah. So when is the release for the first edition of the system, of the control
Mm.
system?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we have a prototype that's available right now. It's not commercially available, so you can't buy it anywhere yet. And there's a few challenges that we've got to overcome before we'll have something that's available. And there's a few dependencies that are built around that. So we need to make sure that we have the funding in place to secure that, whether that comes from private sources or whether that comes through a pre-order campaign or something like that. We're still figuring that
Or
part out.
or I mean, maybe there's a lot of gamers out there that want to bring back that retro game. They could just like chip in
Hmm.
some money and help you out with bringing that to life.
Yeah, yeah. So it sounds like a Kickstarter campaign.
Yeah, bring back the games. That's all I would say. Like, and also these kinds of games are more like very simple to play, and also these
Hmm.
are also it just feels like unlike modern day games like Call of Duty or even League of Legends or Fortnite.
Yeah.
It's like these things you can just play for a couple of levels and they can drop out rather than have to play constantly for longer and longer periods of time, right?
Yeah, so it's interesting because there's almost like they're deceptively easy to get into, in the sense that Pac-Man is very simple. You can move up, down, left, or right. That's it, right? But there's nuance into how the ghosts move, how the maze is laid out, the different techniques and strategies that you can use to maximize your score and continue to get as far as you possibly can. So there's something for everyone, I think. Arcade games were this really fascinating experience where you could just go in, pump a couple quarters into something, play for 20 minutes, play for 10 minutes, and then, just have some great memories with your friends or while you're waiting for your parents that were doing shopping. This was back in the 80s or the 90s. Uh, but at the same time, there are championships that are built around some of these games. There are world records that are built around some of these games. And there are people out there who take these things very, very seriously. And, there's documentaries that have been made about all of this, and people who have gone on to perform at such a high level on these games, because it's easy to forget this, because sometimes, you can look back at these old classic games and, the presentation compared to modern gaming looks, there's an obvious difference there, right? You're working with very different hardware. Um, and, and, and therefore, there's a lot of things where it's easy to look back on that and to just be like, oh, that's simple. That's not going to be difficult. But, I challenge anyone to go back and to play Narc, to play Pac-Man, to play, uh, I mean,
Yeah,
pick any game out.
or even a racing game. Because I'll say back whenever I went to go to arcades or even went back to arcade, I think the first game I always look
Yeah.
forward to is playing racing games because I just love to race. I like to draw. I like to just sit in an imaginary vehicle and then just drive like crazy.
Yeah. And it's like you can definitely do that. But then there's also this, there's a difficulty curve to those games that you just don't find in a lot of modern titles. A lot of modern games will, save checkpoints in the background every 5 minutes, so you never lose any of your progress. And um, you have this system where it's much more conducive to making sure that you're always progressing. Whereas arcade games were very punishing, and it was just like, and you could have an arcade owner that could set difficulty levels on things. So you could go into Street Fighter 2, for example, and you could ramp the difficulty up against the CPU. So if you were playing by yourself and you were playing one of the characters' storylines, you might not get past the first match because the difficulty level was cranked up so high. So there's definitely a difficulty curve that you just don't really see all that much anymore in modern gaming. It does exist in some spaces, of course, but excuse me, it's definitely something that you find a lot less.
Right. And also because of the fact that you know, it is an interesting pathway you're doing which is bringing this to the forefront, like at least bringing
Mm-hmm.
simpler games to the forefront, and then hopefully the way it's going to turn out is it's going to be different from a lot of different outlets that a lot of I think you're big what would you consider your competition in terms of gamers?
Yeah, so it's an interesting space because the thing about gaming is there's definitely subcultures in gaming. You've got people that will only play sports games. You have people that only play fighting games. You have people that only play first-person shooters. So there's definitely those niche groups that will enjoy just that one specific genre of gaming. At the same time, when you start to widen the scope a little bit and sort of take a step back, you see that gaming has such a huge audience. There's about 227 million gamers in the United States alone. That's almost just over 2/3 of every American household has a
yeah.
gamer in it. And so the reason why I'm bringing this up is because through a lot of the research that we've been doing, a lot of people own multiple systems. So, there's people out there who will own a PlayStation, a Nintendo, and an Xbox, whether different variations of, those games or those systems. So it could be like a Nintendo Wii, a PlayStation 2, an Xbox 360, that kind of stuff. So different eras of gaming appeal to different people, and different sort of groupings of games appeal to different people, different first party games, that kind of stuff.
Right.
So, we see our bigger competition is who we see that's already operating in the arcade space specifically.
Right.
And our biggest competition that we see right now is Arcade 1UP. They make the 3/4 custom, or the 3/4 size arcade machines that have, either one single game, depending on the version that you end up buying, or, half a dozen or so games on it.
All right, cool. And so I think we're running out of time at the moment. So let me ask you a quick final question. So what advice, since you're a startup founder and you're looking to bring back the arcade to the virtual world, like what advice would you give to other founders and visionaries of the future?
I would say whatever idea you end up coming to is something that you're passionate about and something you think you want to pursue. Go out and find 10 people that you think would be a customer of yours, 10 people that you think would be interested in that kind of idea. And I don't mean your friends, and I don't mean anyone related to you, your spouse, your partner, anyone like that. Go out and find 10 people that you don't know and talk to them, and just find out what they're interested in. Find out why they have the same passion that you do, or maybe they don't. It'll save you so much time and so much energy, so that you're not running down this path of trying to build a solution to something, only to find out that, hey, no one wants this thing that I'm trying to build here. It's always great if you have the problem yourself that you're trying to solve, which is exactly what Recade was based on. I mentioned NARC earlier, and I wanted to play that game again, so I ended up building myself an arcade machine, and it ended up just being awesome, but didn't really give me all of the features and all the functionality that I really wanted, and that's what led to Recade.
All right, cool.
So I would say don't give up, and definitely just keep working on whatever it is that you're working on.
All right, cool, Adam. Thank you so much for your time and for coming on the Next in Time podcast. And I'm looking forward to seeing how Recade will come and change the world of the arcade game.
Absolutely. Thanks. I really appreciate the time, ST. And for anyone who is interested, I would definitely recommend checking out our site. It's www.recade.io. And also check us out on Twitter. The handle is @recade_io. I'm the one behind that channel. So go ahead and just drop us a message, send me a note, let us know what you think.
All right, cool. All right, Adam, thank you so much.
Thank you.